let's shift gear quickly into the open source discussion. OpenAI, aside from GPT, one day before also launched a new open source model. What's the read from your end, Joao? And I do have my fair bites to say here as well.
They managed to launch a pretty good model. I mean, everyone was, they've been hyping it also for a while. I think OpenAI has like been the hype king of LLMs. I think it's like the traction that Sam Altman gets. But people were really happy with the Queen models. People were really happy with the Llama models when they were coming out. And they were not hating, but throwing shade, let's say, at OpenAI for delaying this open source launch for a while. And they've been delaying it, I think, for a month now.
Since day one, since they became closed source.
And when they finally do it, people are saying, oh, they're going to delay it because it's not as good as what's out there. And it was. Like the open source model from OpenAI, like they call it GPT-OSS. It is as good as the best open source models out there. So it is beating DeepSeek and like not DeepSeek V2, they don't call it that, like the DeepSeek R1 0528, if you want to call it the technical name for it. Like the best DeepSeek model is slightly worse than this new GPT-OSS. It has really good features. It is light in terms of it can be run on some reasonably affordable hardware. Like they said, like the minor version can be run on a laptop, on a phone. The big version can be run on a laptop. It won't be fast on a laptop, so don't expect to have ChatGPT running on your own personal device. It won't be as fast. But the fact that it fits, the fact that they managed to build such a capable model with so few tokens, it's pretty impressive. Like I was saying, you have this log linear correlation between the compute time that you spend on it because it is a reasoning model. So you can be spending more time on compute, get a bit better answers, but then you get diminishing results the more compute you spend. And it is beating DeepSeek. People are really happy with the Queen models also from Alibaba, and that launches us to this open question, and this is like for the viewers, for the listeners, and also to you, Cyril, because I think you have an opinion on this, is open source has been having new models, like, and seeing new models coming out every couple of weeks. Maybe every month that there's a new major model, like a new major open source model. And I'm wondering, and I have no idea actually, if OpenAI is gonna keep launching open source models or keep updating this GPT-OSS, or if they're good enough, like if this OSS was just a PR stunt to get people off their back about being closed source.
Maybe, yeah.
And they're gonna let the Alibaba with the Queen models just get ahead, like get DeepSeek, do new DeepSeek models coming out, and just beat them in terms of performance and benchmarks.
I mean,
do you have an idea what's gonna happen?
I probably have a theory / hypothesis. I'm not affiliated in any sort with OpenAI's.
We're not sponsored.
Platform strategy, not sponsored. But just to wrap up the context, you mentioned that many open source models are being released, and they're most of the time being released in the eastern hemisphere of the world, meaning in China. So many open source models are actually not being pushed from the West necessarily. We have let's say the mental model in the West that we mostly work on competition, which is great. So we have model competition, but we're mostly closing up. So we don't really have a large collaborative ecosystem. There is OpenAI, there is Anthropic, they're both closed, Mistral, some smaller model providers that have been, again, mostly closed. The East is a lot different. So China has this open source, I think, notion since many years. I think even since the years of Linux, Red Hat, and so on and so forth. So they really are adopting open source in a completely different mental framing than we do in the West. So that's why I believe the shipping velocity on China open source is a lot faster. So you mentioned we have Moonshot, we have Alibaba, we have all these different Chinese players that are just pushing the models, but they're also building on top of them. So I think that's a different notion that we have in the West. Meaning, if, for example, Kimi came out by Moonshot, I'm pretty sure all the other competitors like DeepSeek, Alibaba, and whatever else, they're distilling the models and they're trying to augment their own open source whatever, 7 or 8 that's coming next. So there's really this collaborative ecosystem on open source in the East. In the West, we don't really have that. That being said, I think if you're a Western builder, being a professional, a consultant, basically be advising which models to choose, I think you want to have still some sort of accountability on the model providers. Meaning in today's world, since most of the great models so far without OpenAI came from the East, you still had to go through a Chinese vendor or at least a Chinese institution if there was some sort of reliability or some sort of security issues or any other due diligence you want to do. Now with these new models coming up in the West, to answer your question very broadly, Joao, I think it is a great way that we have now basically two major players, hopefully, in the open source world, OpenAI and Meta, because they might be the actual focal point for Western companies building on open source. This is just a theory. So I do think they are keeping to push that, not only because of being the focal topic, but they also have some sort of brand recognition. If they're doing something, they will be attracting users. And I think this is just opening maybe a different gateway. You briefly mentioned it beforehand, Joao, in the sense of Anthropic being mostly B2B, that yes, these open source models by OpenAI might also be now basically be pushed a little bit into the B2B world. That's just another hypothesis. So I do think it's a great notion also to acquire and attract new talent, because we've seen Meta is poaching a lot of the talent of OpenAI. Maybe for that reason, you guys are working closed, come work at Meta and you work at open source, because it's mostly philosophical
But that's
question
the
for
thing.
developers
When people
as
started
well. Yeah.
saying meta poaching, they also started like hypothesizing, well, if they have the best guys and have the budget, they're gonna start doing closed source. So we haven't been seeing new llama models in a while, where Meta's been pretty quiet in the news world about their models. So we might be seeing like a closed source model from Meta in the very near future.
And more open from OpenAI.
Yeah,
So there's a
the
shift in
tables
the
are
tide.
flipped now.
The tables are flipped. So what's the last notion you think they are keeping to push open source, or that was the last one, if you had to guess?
I think for now it was to calm like the PR storm that was happening about them being very closed and very profitable, let's say. I mean, they have government contracts, they have some relation with Palantir, which doesn't have the best PR in the world, but we'll see. I mean, I'm hoping to see more open source models, especially from the West. I'm thinking that, especially with your theory, that China has a lot of more collaborative culture and they can build upon each other's models. Maybe we'll get to AGI first, which would be...
There's, as you said, yeah, they're faster, right? If you
They're
can
faster.
compound knowledge every 2 months with a new model that's just open source, I think they are really leapfrogging the way in the East, as long as they have some sort of funding. Because that's the other notion. Like, how many companies can build a multi-billion-dollar open source model just from scratch? I mean, you have to have some sort of funding behind you that you can build these large language models that are capable of that. And I don't know how the Chinese incentivation structure currently works, but there might be some sort of incentives to build open source with maybe some ease of capital access. And in the West, there's just a few of the handful companies that can actually be doing that. Meta, they cross-finance it with the other businesses, and OpenAI as well. So they might have this ChatGPT B2C product that's basically be cross-financing the open source, basically like Amazon did with AWS, right? So there was Amazon with a retail business, and they just basically be funded AWS for all these years. Maybe that's my last to read. They do have the money, and I think it's a wise way, Sam Altman, to go forward.
I mean, we're
So
hoping to see of open source. I mean, it's very good not only for research and academic purposes, but also it pushes new competitors into the space. We don't want to have 4 or 5 different companies dominating the space like we have in the cloud world, like we have pretty much everywhere in whatever industry sector you want to pick. The more competitors we have, like the better the prices will be, because we've talked about Gemini and Google having the best pricing, OpenAI matching that best pricing. And it always been hypothesized that Google somehow was losing money on this because they couldn't be that much cheaper than everyone else. And they were doing this to get market, and then they're going to increase the prices. And now OpenAI is doing this also on the pricing. Not sure if they're copying the model of they're actually losing money on this API costs being so low, and they're going to launch it and make it way bigger in the future. Or have they found a way to make this and run these models so efficiently and so light that they can actually afford and be profitable with these low API costs?
I think maybe before we wrap up, just to add on one nuance to that point, I mean, it's also worth noting that Google, they have their own TPUs. So they have their own chip infrastructure. They anyway have that for YouTube transcription, like all this like voice to text and whatever other services they have.
They've had a decade's worth of hardware development in-house for these things. So how in the hell is OpenAI matching it? They have to be cutting something, or they have the best deal ever with Microsoft Azure to have low-cost GPUs.
Or they're losing money. I mean, it's not a public company. I think I saw some notions on, them burning cash, right? So it's not that, I don't know how profitable, feel free to challenge me in the comments on this. Currently, OpenAI is, especially if they're building these models at this rapid rate and they don't have their own proprietary cloud, because they have to rely on Azure and other cloud providers. Whereas Google, they have their own TPUs, their own infrastructure. Arguably, and that's just a hypothesis, makes also training and inference hopefully a lot cheaper by them. Because you mentioned a really good point, just to wrap up maybe the episode as well. If you achieve a model construction, be an open source, a closed source, whatever, that's 90% on par with Grok or OpenAI GPT-5, but 90% cheaper. So it's almost as intelligent as the closed model, but it's 90% cheaper. And most of the companies, they will probably take the deal at any given second, especially for most of the tasks. And then the more complicated tasks, they might be quickly looping in a GPT-5, a Claude Opus 4.1, Sonnet 4.1, and one other expensive model maybe from XAI for this particular task. And for all the others, the guard railings, the quick ones, they just use this cheaper one that's 90% the price, a discount as opposed to the bigger model. So that's kind of why I believe they have to lower the prices. Otherwise, this might be happening increasingly more. That's my last guess. Great. I think, Joao, you also have two more notions. What came out of the prompt at the beginning on ChatGPT-5 LangChain?
I should check it out. Let's see how's that going. And also from GPT-5 launch, not the open source model, their own API, OpenAI has this ability. If you're a builder, you can leverage these options, which is you can set the reasoning effort. They call it reasoning effort. Google has had this for a while. They call it reasoning budget. Basically, how much do you want the model to think? And maybe you want some quick thinking, some quick reasoning. Maybe you want 40 hours, like Cyril does, of reasoning and research.
Forever, yes.
And yeah, you can control this now. And depending on your task, on how complex that the use case is, you can divide this effort and you can pretty much adjust the budget according to your own budget, your own cloud costs that you want to achieve. So it's a pretty good ability to have on a GPT-5. Not just let it think as much as it wants, but you can actually control how much it's thinking.
It's super easy. It's just to jump in quickly. Reasoning equals curly braced effort minimal. That's the only line of code you need to add. Other than minimal, I don't even know what the configuration option were. Have you checked that already? I haven't yet.
The values, I have to go on the documentation, but they have I think at least 3 different, in the papers, they have 3 different levels of thinking, but you might have a numerical value that you can use and have as many options as you want. But also another field that Google doesn't have it is the verbosity. So you've had this maximum tokens field on most APIs, which you can set for the maximum length of the answer. Maybe the answer was shorter, like if you set the length to 1,000 tokens. Maybe the answer was only 100, so a couple sentences was good enough. Maybe it was a whole paragraph. But if it reached that maximum limit that you set, it would just stop generating. It would stop computing. It wouldn't change much of the model style. If you want it to be concise, and this is a thing, like if you go on ChatGPT, these models are verbose. They talk for a very long time. They have a lot of text output. And if you wanted to have shorter answers, you'd have to have it in the prompt on your request or on the system prompt to say, be concise or be short or answer in only a couple sentences. Otherwise, these models would go off and just rant about things. And now you can have that on the API directly and set the verbosity. So you can set the model to actually write as much as possible. If you want to report, that'd be a good thing. But if you want a quick answer about something, if you want a yes or no question, especially for the use cases that you for agentic AI, you can set the verbosity to low and have an automatic, and this is fine-tuned into the model, an automatic lowering of output costs and output tokens, and not only have a faster answer because it finishes its output faster, and also better inference costs and probably a better answer for your use case if you want something short. So these 2 fields, I think, make it a really, really competitive offer right now for builders.